So, good day everyone, and thank you for joining on this important topic. And as was highlighted, this is a topic of loss and damage, which is a specific field of climate policy that has been gaining momentum, but perhaps a little bit less solutions at the moment. And what we are concretely talking about is droughts, floods, raising sea levels, those kind of damages that the climate change costs on societies and communities. And as we know that the climate change is progressing and thus the price tag as well. And coming from Suomen Lähetysseuran, Finnish Evangelical Lutheran Mission, this is a topic that we have to take into consideration when planning our development and humanitarian action. Because if we don't reply or respond to this emerging crisis, then we are kind of hopeless without navigation of how we are going to counter these negative effects. And with me on this dialogue, we have Julius Mbatia, who actually is participating from Bonn. And perhaps, Julius, you can introduce yourself and then give a kind of an outlook for our audiences that why this is such a crucial time and place to be actually having these kind of dialogues on the loss and damage. We don't hear anything.
Thank you so much, Nico.
Yeah.
I hope you can hear me now.
Yes, now we can. Thank you.
So I'm actually in Bonn, as you mentioned rightly, where it's happening and will be happening in the next couple of days. We are in the decision-making level of the United Nations on climate change issues, and we will be discussing losses and damages, and we are discussing that as well here. And our hope is that this topic will gain the momentum that it needs, and political leaders, plus also our technical experts, will make the right decisions for the Earth.
Yeah, thank you, Julius. And I'm sure that you all love, but I think we have to start with some sort of definitions. But don't worry, I will give like a real life examples that what we are talking about when we are talking about loss and damage. And as a part of our work in Lähetysseuran, we support activities on a very ground level, like how small-scale farmers can adapt, for instance, to the increasing droughts in their farming practices. So we introduce crops that are drought resistant. We develop water management systems at the local levels. We train people how to use biomass in a more sustainable way to kind of create conditions for better environmental care in the region. But what we are discussing about when we are talking about loss and damage is those specific events when the adaptation limits went beyond. And in this image, this is from Zimbabwe, where we have been working extensively with the agricultural producers, but this is actually a river. This is the great Save River that was used by the Zimbabwe Empire back in 800 years ago for transporting gold to Mozambique. And as you can see, there would be actually quite limited amount of possibilities for the gold transport. But this is the kind of a situation that the farmers face there, that we can adapt to the certain point of drought resistance. But what happens if there is no rain for 1 year, or 2 years, or even 3 years? That how do the communities cope? And I think Julius can give us more on this topic because he comes from Kenya, which is a country that is also high exposure to the climate change. So if you can give us a couple of examples, we would be glad.
Absolutely. And the image that you'll be seeing in the next seconds is an image of our country hit by severe floods. And this happened between the month of April and May, this month as well. And as you can see there, you have community members who've been displaced. Floods got to hit our country due to heavy rainfall and affected half of the country. So half of the country was submerged in flood water. And number two, we had also about 232 people who got to unfortunately lose their lives. As we speak now, about 15,000 to 18,000 people are living in internally displaced camps, and all this is part of the loss and damage. And the next image is a very interesting one as well, because it goes back into the month of November. And the image reflecting on the screen right now would be an image of our country hit by drought and famine. And it's so strange that within a span of 4 to 5 months, coming from such a severe drought, where you can even see some of the cattle which have died, the place so dry, we were hit by the floods. And one of the things that we would want to say is that these are individual events, yes, but are all connected. Climate change is at the center of this, and the poor, the marginalized are the ones who get to suffer the most. And this is the kind of conditions you get to see in different countries, where due to climate change events, which we would term as the ones that are causing losses and damages, are contributing to loss of development gains across the part of the world where they hit most and the most vulnerable. Over, thank you.
Thank you. Because I think there is an important message that is quite commonly perhaps misunderstood. Because in a way, when we are talking about global climate change, we quite often hear the expression that it affects us all, which is true. But at the same time, we have to acknowledge that it affects some more than others. And I think this is the crux of the justice issue as well, because it's typically the poor and the marginalized that faces the heaviest brunt. And then I think the second point here that we could raise is that when we are looking these kind of images of floods or droughts, it actually doesn't look that there is much that we can do actually. That climate change is like a force of nature that clears everything in its path. But that's actually not true. That we have different kind of ways that we can actually minimize, avoid, and address these losses and damages that the climate change causes. And this was topic of the research that we conducted in our shared network of ACT-allianssin. So perhaps, Julius, you could next unfold these kind of practices that what can we actually do in order to not have these kind of cataclysmic events happening around the globe.
There's indeed, as you said rightly, something that can be done. And we did a research, and presenting that research is our first image, where you're seeing a community which is living happily and in harmony with nature. You can see livelihoods are excelling. You can see there's a riverbank and the river is flowing. And you can as well see people engaging in different economic activities. Trees are blooming and vegetation is blooming as well. The next image on your screen right now will be an image where is one that is very interesting, because then there's the hitting of what we would call flooding. So there's a heavy rainfall, downpour, and then unfortunately the river gets to break its banks. And what you see now is a flooded community, a flooded region, and you can see the devastation there. So this is what we talk about when you talk of loss and damage events, getting to clear houses. Unfortunately, you can see also cattle, live people as well, drowning in the rivers. And you can also see some of the community members running to help those in need. And the next image of our discussion on this is an evidence that we can do something even when the event is taking place. So we are seeing that there's some development of the riverbank. So we are seeing people who are trying to reconstruct the riverbank. We are seeing some camps there which are to host the people who have been internally displaced. And this is happening during the event, meaning that there's the potential of trying to calm the extent to which the event is happening. And the next image is what we need to talk about more actually, because the next image shows us a community that has been able to build back better, a community which through the development, for example, of a stronger and a higher riverbank has been able to control flooding, a community which is coming back. It has been helped to recover, it has been helped to rebuild its livelihoods, and a community where again it's living in harmony with nature. And this then means that it is possible to do something in the event of loss and damage. We can rebuild, we can reconstruct, and we can recover. And that is the message that we are talking about.
Thank you, Julius, because I think this is really inspiring in the sense that instead of being like a passive victims to the emerging catastrophes and loss and damage caused by the climate change, that we can also be active, have agency to kind of create better conditions and create this kind of a sense of hope also when moving towards future. But when I say this, I also want to emphasize that by large, we are failing to do this. That the actual gaps of the needs to address, minimize, or avoid loss and damages are significantly higher than what is actually mobilized as a support. The gap is humongous. And this is just a typical example of this kind of a political outset that we are facing. That, for instance, Finland in the Dubai climate negotiations half a year ago promised that we will deliver $3 million for the newly established loss and damage fund, which of course is encouraging. We are kind of taking the right side of history and acknowledging the needs of the vulnerable communities in the south. But then at the same time, we cut funding from tens of millions from different UN funds and programs that aid in preparing risk preparedness, in disaster risk reduction, or financing adaptation. So in a way, we are talking about this kind of a lack of willingness to commit to actually acknowledge these problems and how we are going to face them on as an international community. And I think this is exactly what you are trying to do, Julius, in Bonn as well, to find these kind of approaches through which we can build these conditions for the communities to survive, actually, this climate crisis and thrive even despite of it. So what do you see that are these kind of key issues that need to be changed, that this humongous gap between the action and the need could be closed? What would be your message, for instance, to the Finnish negotiators and politicians there? Sorry, now we don't hear you.
Absolutely, Nico.
Yeah.
I take a pause so that I can stand in solidarity with all the communities affected by climate change and the lives lost. It's indeed not fair, not just, because then the people who are affected are the ones with the least limited political and economic power. And my message is that we must have the courage to do more, and there will be never a right time to make a change. We must always, in my view, contend with inadequate political power. We must always contend with circumstances not allowing us to potentially do much, but build as an opposition to that commitment. We must create discussion spaces to unpack the impacts of loss and damage, but importantly as well, discuss the solutions to loss and damage. As we've seen, there are things we can do. And I believe that the Finnish people would want to stand to be counted in providing the necessary political leadership to the climate crisis. And I think that then the big question to all of us is, do we have the agency to do that? And I would indeed say yes. From Bonn, the message is clear that we must invest responsibly. We must put our finances where it benefits the planet, animals, biodiversity, and humanity, and that we must divest or move our finances from the wrong kind of channels which are destroying our harmonious living with nature. And I think we need to definitely agree that we have to invest in supporting communities on the front line of climate crisis. We must invest in building shared solutions as a people. And I believe that together, with courage, with bravery, we can indeed speak out and call out injustices, but importantly, partner in creating a world that we can live in, including those marginalized and the poor and vulnerable.
Thank you so much, Julius, for the thought. So this is the point where we are reaching the end of the presentation. So let me give still kind of a concluding marks on our behalf, because what I think is that at this juncture, the important takeaway is that people living in the front lines of the climate change, that they have not given up, but they are creating and testing and innovating new solutions how we are going to coexist with this unfolding crisis. And I think that concerns also us, that we have to have this kind of a sense of faith in order to be able to sort out joint solutions. But then also that it's not just this kind of a discussion about goodwill or something like this, but it's actually that we need to do the concrete action. How we engage businesses, policymakers, NGOs, state authorities in sorting out this matter, because there isn't any kind of a straightforward, simple, one-size-fits-all policies, but this is something that affects us differently in the different corners of the world. And in order to do that, however, there is one common challenge: lack of political will. And then finally, what I think Julius was mentioning is that this is not mere question of the inadequate finances, but this is also this kind of a lack of bravery in order to have us this kind of a balanced, equal-termed dialogue on what are the best mechanisms to address loss and damage. And for instance, Bonn serves a good example of this kind of a coming together. And of course, for us, it's kind of a responsibility to demand also our leaders to do the best and meet also the leaders from the other corners of the globe. So thank you for this presentation. That's it, folks. And thank you, Julius. Good luck